Well, folks, it's official. We have a new mental health disorder. So the new DSM finally came out after 10 years. It came out in March, and the DSM is the diagnostic manual we use to diagnose all mental health disorders. There are quite a few changes in this updated manual. The DSM-5-TR with the text revised. So we're going to go over the 6 changes that I find most interesting, and that includes the addition of this new mental health disorder. So stick around to the end and I'll break that down for you, and I'll give you my opinion on all these changes. First off, there was a big push for racial diversity, more cultural inclusion, and racial discrimination to be acknowledged. Things like using the term Latinx, removing the term Caucasian because it makes no sense, using terms like racialized to really include how these things impact folks' mental health in an individual way. The American Psychiatric Association, the organization that writes the manual, said they put together a panel of 29 cultural diversity experts in mental health in order to make these changes as relevant and accurate as possible. Number 2, in a similar vein, the APA wanted to change some of the terminology around gender to reflect a lot of the cultural shifts we've had in society around gender dysphoria. So here are a couple examples of terminology change. For example, removing desired gender and adding experienced gender, taking out cross-sex medical procedure, updated to gender-affirming medical procedure, reflecting the gender-affirming care movement that we have in the medical field. Number 3, there was a big push to more conservatively diagnose kids with mental health disorders. Often there's a lot of leeway as far as some of the symptoms experienced in order to diagnose somebody, only needing to have 5 out of 10, for example, in certain disorders. However, for children, they wanted to make it a little bit tighter. They wanted someone to have pretty much all of the symptoms in a lot of these different categories in order to make the diagnosis, and again, be more cautious when it comes to diagnosing kids. This one I find really interesting. From the DSM-4-TR to the DSM-5, they got rid of something called unspecified mood disorder, basically saying, well, you don't really meet enough criteria to say you have a depressive disorder, but the symptoms you have are clinically significant enough so that we can give you treatment. However, what they did was they made it so that us as clinicians had to specify whether it was unspecified bipolar-related disorder, so having some type of manic symptoms in there, or an unspecified depressive disorder, but this just opened it up to give you a larger umbrella to be able to diagnose people and give them treatment. Number 5 is interesting because now we as clinicians could diagnose suicidal ideation and behavior such as self-harm as a disorder in and of themselves. Before, they would just be part of a disorder, something like borderline personality disorder or certain types of depression. The reason they said they wanted to do this is that so we could better identify and track those behaviors that they are clinically significant in and of themselves, that they deserve more attention. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the final big change, we have a new disorder, and that is prolonged grief disorder. So this disorder is being included in the trauma and stressor-related disorder category, basically where you'd find things like PTSD or an adjustment disorder, which basically means that you have some stressful event in your life that significantly impacts your functioning in the short term. Basically, what the DSM is saying is that if you're experiencing significant grief that negatively impacts your life for over a year, this is clinically significant and you should be able to get treatment. Now remember, at the end of the day, a lot of these diagnoses are solely for the point of being able to be reimbursed by insurance companies so that you could receive services. Well, since this is a big deal that we have a new disorder, we may as well read off some of the symptoms. So, identity disruption, marked sense of disbelief about the death, avoidance of reminders that the person is dead, intense emotional pain such as anger, bitterness, sorrow related to death, difficulty with reintegration such as problem engaging with friends, pursuing interests, planning for the future, emotional numbness, absence or marked reduction of emotional experience, feeling that life is meaningless, intense loneliness, feeling alone or detached from others. In addition, the person's bereavement lasts longer than might be expected based on social, cultural, and religious norms. So what is my opinion on all these changes, you ask? Not gonna lie, that's pretty disappointing given how much we've learned in the past 10 years with all the research and knowledge that's come out, and there's a couple changes I would have really liked to have seen. One example of this would be having different categories of trauma and stressor-related disorders, such as PTSD. So I have a lot of clients who come in who have significant childhood trauma or other forms of trauma, and it's hard to treat them or at least justify a diagnosis because the threshold for having to have PTSD is really high. Therefore, a lot of people can't get treatment, especially people who are like veterans can't get the treatment they need because it is really difficult to get diagnosed. Being an addiction professional, I would have liked to seen some changes there too, although I don't think they were proposed whatsoever. For example, in the old DSM before even the 5, we had abuse and dependence. It would differentiate between these two types of substance abuse. However, in the DSM-5, they got rid of this differentiation and they just made it on a 1, 2, 3 scale, which is good in a way because addiction is on a spectrum. However, I really think there should have been that differentiation between abuse and dependence. I don't think all substance use is created equal, and it's not always a chronically relapsing disease for folks. A lot of times people have problematic substance use based on certain life stressors. A lot of people have been there, and I don't think it's necessarily be on the same spectrum. As far as those other changes I mentioned, they all make sense to me. I agree with all of them, but we'll see how they turn out in practice. For someone who knows more about diversity, equity, and inclusion, for example, I'd love to hear their opinion. I know that the DSM probably had good intentions with this, but we'll see how this theory turns out into practice and how it's practically applied. All right, folks, so I want to hear your opinion. What do you think of the changes? What do you think of my opinion? Do you agree? Go in the comments and let me know what you think, and keep following me if you want to hear more about mental health and addiction-related content.